Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 149, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, July 21st, 2023. The weekend is upon us, and you know what to do. If you need some plans, head to holycitycenter.com/events, or just go to the main page and look for the Charleston weekend events post, where it'll show you just the weekend, whereas the first link I gave you will actually, you can look even further ahead and past into next week if you need some plans. So be sure to do that. Get out there and have some fun this weekend. Stay safe and have fun with whatever you choose to do. At the moment, I only have one for sure plan going on this weekend, and that is tonight. I'm going to the Gilliard Center to see Alana Glazer. She is probably best known for being one of the stars of Broad City, which aired on Comedy Central. Not quite sure what the show is going to be about. You know, if it's going to be like stand-up comedy, if it's going to be kind of a mix of things like the Samantha Bee show was at the music hall, or it was like comedy, but also was similar to, you know, her former television show. But either way, looking forward to seeing what she is going to bring to the stage. It should be a good time, and I'll check in on that on Monday. In the meantime, we really don't have any more time to talk about anything but the news. I've got lots to discuss, so let's just get right into it. The U.S. Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case that could fundamentally reshape South Carolina's congressional map along the coast and determine whether the current political lines discriminate against black voters in Charleston. That's right. We've talked about this before. District 1, which Representative Nancy Mace is currently in that seat, was determined here in South Carolina to be gerrymandered along racial lines in an effort to dilute the black vote. However, the state Republicans decided they wanted to challenge that ruling. It's made its way to the Supreme Court, who agreed to hear the case. And now we know when the actual beginning of that case will be. A calendar that was released back on July 14th by the Supreme Court, and now we're talking about the U.S. Supreme Court, not the state one, shows that oral arguments for this case will be on October 11th, of course, in Washington, D.C. The outcome of the case, which, by the way, if you want to search for it and get updates and all that, is Alexander v. South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP. This case could determine whether a different congressional map will be in place in the 2024 election for voters in places like Beaufort, Berkeley, Charleston, Colleton, Dorchester, and Jasper counties. Again, because that currently covers the seat held by Nancy Mace. If it's ruled that they are indeed, this district was indeed gerrymandered along racial lines, there will be some big changes. As I mentioned, South Carolina Republican officials have asked the higher court to intervene in this case after a lower court said the map had unconstitutionally exiled, in their words, 30,000 black voters for partisan gain. Attorneys bringing the suit asked the court to schedule oral arguments at the beginning of its new term in October and issue a decision by January 1st to ensure that the 2024 elections can proceed smoothly. So we're still a couple months out from this October hearing, but I think all people involved are looking forward to that timeline being met. So when the 2024 election comes around, we either know that, yes, we're currently voting in a district that was ruled not to be gerrymandered. So, hey, we got a decision, or that it was indeed gerrymandered. And now we're going to have new congressional lines, which could make big swings for some races here in the state. So I think no matter where you fall in this, if you believe that it was gerrymandered or not, I think everybody will be happy that the plan is to have this figured out before the election. So we'll see what happens. I'll be sure to keep you updated when that case gets underway. Speaking of elections, the Post and Courier recently ran a very good article, which I encourage you to read. The link is in the show notes, as usual. And it's about how election skeptics aren't going away in this state specifically, but of course, nationwide. They also said, the Post and Courier, that is, that these skeptics are starting to get organized for 2024. So again, the article's really good. I'm going to just kind of run through some highlights from it. I encourage you to read it. But it starts with the story of Cynthia Holland, who works in the Aiken County Elections Office and has been doing so for nearly a quarter of a century. And she just was really passionate about democracy, participating in the political process, and volunteering to be part of this election office. Unfortunately for her, like so many other election officials around this state, and again, probably many others, they're tired and frustrated. She told the Post and Courier, that she's tired of things like a steady stream of Freedom of Information Act requests that have bombarded her office in the wake of this stolen election myth from, 2020. Some of those requests included, there are people seeking her emails, information on voting records, and even people have requested office security camera footage. So, they're also frustrated of seeing activists show up at monthly board meetings. They're packing these meetings, which I'm sure normally are very boring and low key, and not much is in the news about what happens at these things. But now we're seeing very packed meetings, and most of them are activists and people who have decided that they're poll watchers, as the Post and Courier said. They're self-appointed poll watchers who have showed up at all 86 precincts during the 2022 primaries. And the impression from poll workers is that these activists believe that they know poll workers' jobs better than they do, which of course is ridiculous. And then the Post and Courier runs down some more specific examples. In July of 2020, a woman who was an organizer for a national group that has endorsed these claims of widespread voter fraud, which are false. There is no widespread voter fraud, as we all know. But in any event, this woman who is the head of that type of organization was actually appointed to the board of elections, putting someone who is clearly an activist. This isn't just me saying that. I mean, clearly she is part of a group that endorses claims of voter fraud. She's an activist. And now she is on the body that oversees someone like Holland, who we mentioned before. And Miss Holland said that all of this has led to her anxiety increasing so much so that she's needed to be put on medication. And she's frustrated. She's saying all this stuff is lies. She called them downright lies when talking to the Post and Courier, saying that people are trying to target her integrity and not looking at the bigger picture, that none of this is about her. And, just because they've seen these lies on social media, it has nothing to do with her. And there's no need for these personal attacks. She isn't the only one that feels this way. Howie Knapp, who is the executive director of the South Carolina Election Commission, told the Post and Courier that some of these activists have, that their aim is to make election poll workers' lives, a living hell. And he said that he's actually had activists say that to him personally. So that's not just him saying it feels this way. It's like that's what they've told him their intent is. And, as we have 2024 coming up, we were just talking about that election, and, it's going to be another crazy one no matter what happens. And obviously, there's a lot that is scheduled to happen between now and then, namely these court cases involving former President Donald Trump, who is running for office and is currently way out ahead of anybody else on the Republican side. So there's a lot that could happen. But regardless of who the nominees end up being, we all know the 2024 election is going to be just like 2020. There's going to be people spreading false information, or just outright lies, misrepresentations, and all that kind of stuff. And the officials know that, and they really don't think 2024 is necessarily the end. They don't see an end to this nonsense at all. And of course, as I've mentioned, nationwide, but also here specifically in South Carolina, there is no evidence of election fraud on a grand scale. There have been some very, very small incidents, and there's been some investigations of small town municipal elections. Knapp told the a state Senate panel this winter that there's been some of those small town things, but nothing on the national. When we're voting for president in the state, senators, etc., and that those incidents were very small and rare. Now, despite all of that, election skeptics, they're still pushing these theories and lies and looking for things that aren't there. And Knapp wanted to point out specifically that these skeptics' efforts have not led to or even assisted in any way the discovery of a single case of election fraud here in South Carolina. So all these people pushing this lie and these theories and making their lives harder, election workers' lives harder, haven't even assisted, let alone found themselves one single case of election fraud in South Carolina. So the only incidents that they found have been on small town municipal elections, as I mentioned, and it was not because of anything any of these activists have brought to the election commission, which means that the election commission is doing their job. However, they found these, small incidents on the, again, down ballot races. However they got that information, it wasn't from activists. It's because they're doing their job, and they found it, and they investigated and took appropriate measures. Now, not only have they not helped in any way, again, here in the state, by contrast, the Post and Courier says that these skeptics' efforts may actually be making elections less secure, as voting office administrators are devoting hours or even days to responding to all these crazy 2020 related FOIA requests. FOIA, of course, Freedom of Information Act requests. When media, or actually anybody in the community, can request certain types of information from government bodies and others for that matter. This is also, besides all this wasting time, because it is their job. If they get these FOIA requests, they have to fulfill them. They have to look into things. So, in addition to wasting time doing that, a lot have actually left the profession altogether because they're just tired of the constant attacks on their integrity and all this nonsense that's been going on over the last 3-ish years. To put it in perspective, FOIA requests to the state election commission are actually up 500% compared to before the 2020 election. So before that, handful of requests, specifically in Charleston County, they said that, they used to receive a few requests each year. Now it seems a new request comes in almost weekly, so it's a big difference. 500% is a gigantic increase. And of course, that means more hours spent looking into these, printing out paperwork or whatever you need to do to get these requests out to people. So all that can take away from their normal job and what they should be doing. Specifically, many county officials told the Post and Courier that a group called SC Safe Elections is the primary organizer of all the state's election skeptics. This group now advocates for things like a return to paper ballots, elimination of early voting, and giving control of elections to towns or even the precincts themselves, instead of state and federal levels. It's also the person who started this group. This is now her full-time job, the Post and Courier said. And she spoke to them and told them that she estimates at least $35,000 of her own money have been put towards the group's efforts. What a waste of money, especially when we just told you, thanks to the Post and Courier's reporting and information from election officials, they have not assisted one bit in finding any election interference, any election fraud in the state. So, you can get far more details, even more examples of the things that people are requesting and doing that are making our election workers' jobs much harder. And it's a really great article because it's a deep dive. Yes, there is some broad, like, hey, there's some bad things going on, but they point to some very specific examples. So it's not just like this, oh, we feel like things are, they have this data, like that 500% increase in requests. So go check it out. The big picture here, though, is that these election skeptics aren't going anywhere. And I think we all know that, especially any of us that spend time online in any capacity. And I think we sometimes just kind of roll our eyes and be like, these people, they're ridiculous. They're believing lies, or they know that these are lies and they just want their team, quote unquote, to win, which is a problem. But at the same time, you don't really think too much about it. Like, they're just gonna, be keyboard warriors and be a pain in the butt. But there's not any real world consequences to these things. But of course there is, and we've seen that. And when the January 6th committee was doing their hearings, there was the woman and her mother who were poll workers who have been harassed because they were targets of a completely made up lie about them doing something shady when they were working in an election center. I believe it was in Georgia. And it's led because also the former president retweeted this like lie from another account, which just amplified it a billion times. And they faced harassment, people bothering them, and whether it was online threats or phone calls or seeing them in person. And so we've seen what this can do, and we've heard stories of election poll workers quitting because they don't want to put up with this crap. And it's going to lead to a few things. One, less people working could make our elections less safe. Also, if the good poll workers who are there doing their jobs are quitting, they could be replaced by election skeptics and people who will actually do things inappropriately in their role while they're at the polls. So there's that side of things, as well as we've got these yahoos who, like I said, I thought they're just keyboard warriors, but no, some are forming groups or are participating with these groups and, bothering these election officials, flooding them with ridiculous requests for information on this, wild goose chase that they're on. And it's certainly concerning, and we need to be keeping an eye out for these things, because the people that are the loudest about complaining about election integrity have not shown that they actually support election integrity so much as they just want to make sure their side wins. So very, very concerning. And it's even worse when you consider this state wasn't even in question in the 2020 election. This wasn't like a swing state. It was not a close vote. Trump won this state, and there's still people here in this blood red state going against this election lies theory. And what's the point in this state? I mean, don't get me wrong. If this was true, they should be doing it. But what's the point? There's no real close elections here for the most part. There's a handful, but what are they trying to find exactly? Because this state overwhelmingly voted for Trump in both elections and is blood red. What is the point? It's ridiculous, and it's not going anywhere. All right, unfortunately some sad news to share here. You may have heard this story. It's devastating, but two young children from Charleston remain missing after that is of this recording. There could be updates at any moment, but they are still missing after dangerous floodwaters claimed the lives of 5 total people in southeastern Pennsylvania this past Saturday evening. So, according to a ABC affiliate in Philadelphia, which was then picked up by the local ABC News 4 here in Charleston, that among the 5 dead are 32-year-old Katie Seeley, who is the mother of the missing 9-month-old boy and 2-year-old girl, according to police. And again, they are from the Charleston area. According to Upper Makefield Fire Chief Tim Brewer, that's of course in Pennsylvania, Seeley and her family were visiting the area and were on their way to a barbecue when they became trapped in a flash flood. That's when the mother and the 2 children were swept away in the floodwaters. The father, grandmother, and a 4-year-old boy all made it to safety, according to the police. So 3 members of that family thankfully got out of the flash flood. They found the 32-year-old mother, unfortunately deceased, and they just have not found the 2 children yet. Hold out hope, of course, that somehow, some way, they have survived and they are somewhere safe. But it has been nearly a week now since they've been seen, so it's not looking great. But you want to certainly keep hope alive against everything that we're seeing in this case. Authorities are continuing their search, of course, for the 2 young children, and hopefully they will be located in some capacity, whatever the situation may be. On this past Monday, that police department up in Pennsylvania did ID the missing children. Their names are Maddie Shields, 2 years old, and then Conrad Shields, who is 9 months old, as I mentioned. There is a GoFundMe that has been set up for the family. It has already skyrocketed. It's nearly at $200,000. So obviously, this is a story that is, really getting to people, and understandably so. Just a tragedy for a local family. It's horrible to think about what they're going through, the surviving members of this family, and how they're still trying to figure out what happened to 2 children. It's just awful, awful situation. Obviously, thoughts and prayers are with this family and anybody here in the Charleston area that knows them. And again, hoping for really, really good news. But regardless, they have lost one family member, and it's going to be a long road ahead for them. All right, let's try to switch gears here a little bit. We haven't talked about restaurants and things in Charleston in a little bit. I do have posts up about restaurants that are opening, closing, that are planning to open, etc. But on this podcast, I just don't get to it that much because there's so much bigger news going on. So I wanted to share one that I think is interesting. Stars Rooftop and Grill Room, which you may know is on King Street. It's been here for several years. It's popular, especially at night, because they have a pretty cool rooftop bar that people go to. Well, they've announced that they're going to rebrand that rooftop bar, or terrace as they call it, and it's now going to be called Satellite Bar. Their intent, they say, is to cater to a more mature audience. So they're going to do that in a few ways. Some, are what they're offering and decor, stuff that's like, oh, okay, well, I guess you could consider that more mature. But the most tangible evidence of that is that they are going to institute a new 23-year-old plus policy on Friday and Saturday nights after 9 p.m. Few bars in this area already do this type of thing. But yes, after 9 o'clock on a Friday or Saturday night, everyone on that bar or in that bar has to be 23 years old or older. So That is one way they're trying to shift gears to an older audience. The rebranding will also include an updated exterior design, some menu changes as well. They also plan to expand their live music offerings and will have live performances on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. They are also planning to introduce an open mic night on Thursday, so they'll have 4 days of entertainment. They also plan on having like a VIP access available in the bar for diners to access before or after their meals at the restaurant. Construction at Satellite Bar is set to be completed by the end of this month. They plan on hosting an exclusive invite-only launch party sometime in August, and then shortly thereafter, the venue will be rolled out to the public. The federal government says that the party is over for a floating island that is currently sitting in a tidal creek near Folly Beach, and it wants a judge to order the charter boat business that rents this structure out for, parties, festivities, etc., to permanently remove it and pay for any damages. So this is similar to another story, which I'll reference here in a moment. But what this is about, there's about 1,000 square foot structure that is called Hooley Island, and it's operated by a company called Hooley Worldwide Incorporated. And it's being deemed that this is an illegal obstruction in the waters and a violation of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. This is according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, who filed a lawsuit with these claims on July 14th. It was filed in the U.S. District Court here in Charleston. The government alleges that Hooley, which does business as a company called Huck Finn Charters, did not have permission to install this man-made wooden deck, which is currently sitting in the middle of a creek that flows into the Folly River. The company has not yet responded for comment. This is as of July 19th when the Post and Courier covered this story, but I haven't seen any comment as of this recording. So still nothing from the company yet. So what is this structure about? You probably have an idea, but this company, Hooley, rents this floating island basically to people who want to maybe have a party or a getaway, in the middle of the water on this man-made raft, I guess you could say. It's a platform. And the rates start at $600 for 2 hours. Guests get there by being shuttled by a boat, and that's how they obviously leave the structure as well. The structure includes lounge chairs and a grill, according to the company's website. Customers, again, according to the company's website, can also purchase shotgun shells, clay targets, and biodegradable golf balls to hit off of Hooley Island, as the website says. So, all right, anyway, putting all that aside, as part of this lawsuit, the federal government wants the company to account for the money that's been made operating the structure as a commercial venture and turn those proceeds over for use in waterway remediation projects that are conducted by the Army Corps. The complaint is the second in recent months targeting floating structures here in the Charleston area waterways. You may remember, and we talked about on this podcast in May, that the federal government also asked a judge to force the removal of a tiki bar that's been sitting in the Ashley River for several years. The bar, owned by a company called Hydrofly LLC, has yet to file a response to the complaint, so it is still pending when you go look into it. So there, we don't have an update on that. So two different businesses that are, basically a floating party structure in the water, are having a hard time with the government right now, saying that they shouldn't be there. So we'll see what happens with these cases. I'm sure several of you have, if not actually attended a party on one of these structures, you've certainly seen these things. And I'll be sure to give you updates as they come out. And lastly, kind of a late breaking story when I was recording this podcast, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned it. There was an incident in North Charleston that, before details came out, sounded very scary. Still turned out to be a very sad situation, but not as bad as it could have been. And you'll see what I mean here. So, a spokesperson for the North Charleston Police Department says that customers called 911 on Thursday after seeing a man walking around DD's discount store armed with a long gun. They referenced in a press conference I watched, they referenced it as a long rifle, but no confirmation of like what exactly type of gun it is. But some kind of long gun is how it was described by customers. DD's discount store is on Rivers Avenue in North Charleston. So why this seemed so scary at first was because the call went out as a possible active shooter situation. So there was a huge response from both police and deputies as they were going to the shopping center where the store is located. And as I mentioned, it's on Rivers. It's kind of near the intersection of Rivers and Aviation Avenue. So there was no real details that local media had. People just saw this huge response, and of course, the thought is active shooter. When you see something like that, or something close to it, a lot of people could potentially be in danger when you're seeing that big of a response from police. So as officers arrived, thankfully they found anyone who was in the store when this man walked in with this long gun. They were out. They had evacuated the store. No one was hurt. The man was alone in the store. So that's the good news. It wasn't actually an active shooter situation. Police have said they haven't found any, no witnesses that have said that the man was threatening them in any way or was pointing the gun at anyone. He just kind of walked into the building with the gun, which is scary, of course. I would have been frightened to see that. And so understandably, they called police and were afraid that this guy could be someone who could turn into an active shooter. Thankfully, that wasn't the case, but unfortunately, we don't have a happy ending to the story because as officers arrived and then they were about to go into the store, they heard a single gunshot. When they eventually did get inside, making sure everything was secure beforehand, they found that the subject was dead, and police at this point are saying he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Thankfully, as I mentioned, authorities said there were no hostages and no other injuries. And it basically, as I just described it, they said that based on what they've heard from witnesses and things and what this man may have been saying as he was walking around the store, that he was suicidal. And that would seem to be the case considering he took his own life. So that's why I said late breaking news. Those are the details that came out in the press conference that was held on Thursday. There may be some additional details that are released later. Police did say they will eventually have the incident report out, but as of this recording, that was not available yet. So we'll see if there's anything else going on. A sad situation, but it sounded like it could have been much, much worse. So thankful that it didn't go that route, but obviously sad to hear about the subject and what he may have been going through and, how this ultimately ended for him. So that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to holycitycenter.com/shop to pick up merchandise, or go to patreon.com/holycitycenter to support through one of those tiers. You can also rate, review, subscribe on whatever streaming platform you're listening to. That will help out this podcast as well, and I certainly appreciate that. I want to thank you all for listening. Have a great weekend. Remember, holycitycenter.com/events so you can find something to do this weekend. I look forward to talking to you on Monday. Before I go, a big thank you to Cole Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this episode, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. Until I talk to you on Monday, have a safe and fun weekend, and as always, good night and good luck.